Hello, everyone. I'm Graham, and welcome to Cam Terror. Tonight, we venture into the darkest corners of America's wilderness. For centuries, the legend of Sasquatch has persisted, but this episode isn't about legend. It's about horrifying reality. We're diving into the most credible and chilling Bigfoot encounters with humans. Let's go. You know how people always say, the most isolated corners of the world hold the biggest secrets? Well, let me tell you about a secret hidden so deep in the Canadian Rockies that it almost defies belief. What I witnessed during my time as a search and rescue pilot didn't just change my career. It fundamentally changed what I thought a human being was, what survival meant, and what intelligence could look like. I've never told this story outside of my official, heavily redacted report, mostly because the details would get me institutionalized. But I need to get it out before the memory of those final, silent moments overwhelms me completely. The whole thing started on a cold October morning 5 years ago. I was based out of a small airfield in British Columbia, flying missions over territory so vast it felt like flying over an ocean of pine and granite. The call came in as a routine missing person. A 5-year-old boy named William Thomas, camping with his parents, vanished without a trace from their lakeside tent. The family had awoken to find the back zipper of their tent slashed and the child gone. No footprints, no struggle, just a missing kid and an impossible hole in the canvas. The official theory was a nocturnal predator, bear or wolf, but the scene was too clean, too deliberate for a wild animal. I joined the search team, flying grids over the dense forest for days, seeing nothing but trees and mountains. The search lasted for 6 brutal weeks before it was called off. Everyone assumed the worst: exposure, hypothermia, or a quick death from a predator. The area was notorious for its harsh conditions. I flew the final grid patterns myself, a grim, silent ritual over the same patch of forest, feeling the familiar weight of failure. But on the last day, just as I was turning the helicopter back toward the airfield, my co-pilot George Henry spotted something. A flash of unnatural color deep in a ravine miles off the main search coordinates, a place no human could have reached on foot. We circled back, dropping low over a tangle of ancient cedar and fir. It wasn't a body. It was a shelter, impossibly crafted, tucked into the roots of a massive, impossibly old Douglas fir. It wasn't a tent. It was woven from branches, bark, and moss, blended so seamlessly with the forest that from 100 feet up, it looked like a natural part of the tree. I landed the chopper on a precarious patch of granite nearby, and George and I approached on foot, rifles ready. The silence was absolute, the kind of oppressive quiet that screams imminent danger. The structure smelled powerfully of earth, pine needles, and something else. A musky, animalistic odor that burned the back of my throat, unlike any bear or elk scent I'd ever encountered. As we cautiously approached the woven shelter, a figure emerged from the deep shadows of the interior. Not a beast, but not exactly a man either. It was a child, a boy, dressed in rough, animal skin garments with long, matted hair. It was William Thomas. He was alive, though his eyes held a wild, wary look that wasn't human. He was nearly twice the size he should have been for an 11-year-old, powerfully built, with hands that seemed too large for his frame. But what made my blood run cold was his expression. He showed no fear, no joy, no sign of recognition at the sight of 2 armed men, just a profound, unwavering, animalistic distrust. We tried to speak to him, keeping our voices low and calm. "William, it's okay, we're here to take you home," I called out, slowly lowering my rifle. The boy just stared, his head cocked to one side, processing the sounds as if they were a foreign language. He didn't speak English, he didn't speak at all. Then, from the dense underbrush behind the shelter, a creature emerged. It was massive, easily 9 feet tall, covered in thick, dark brown hair. This wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. This was a Sasquatch, standing motionless, observing us with an intelligence that shattered every certainty I'd ever held about the natural world. The creature didn't make a sound, didn't growl or threaten us physically. It simply stood, placing one enormous hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy, William, leaned back against its leg with a gesture of complete, natural trust. The scene was surreal. A legendary monster protecting a missing human child who was dressed like a primitive cave dweller. We were locked in a standoff, our guns useless against the sheer impossible reality of the moment. My mind raced through the training manuals, desperately seeking a protocol for confronting a cryptid that was displaying parental instinct toward a human. There was no such chapter, of course. The boy, still leaning against the creature, finally spoke. Not with our words, but with a series of deep, guttural sounds, clicks, and a long, mournful moan. It was a language unmistakably delivered with the fluency of a native speaker. The Sasquatch answered with a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to vibrate through the ground, then gestured toward us with its free hand, a simple, clear motion toward the ravine and the helicopter. The message was unmistakable. Leave now. The boy was communicating with the creature, and the creature was making a definitive demand for our immediate and permanent retreat. It was an incredibly unsettling display of complex communication. George and I exchanged a look. This was beyond our scope. It was beyond human understanding. We retreated slowly, keeping our rifles low, but trained on the massive creature and the boy it protected. As we climbed back toward the helicopter, I looked down to see the boy still watching us, now holding something in his hand. A small, crudely carved wooden toy. It was a final, silent acknowledgement of our shared humanity, an unexplainable moment in the deep woods. We took off, leaving them both behind, knowing that bringing the boy back would mean a violent confrontation that neither of us was prepared for. It was a haunting and difficult decision. When we returned to the airbase, we filed the most insane report of our careers. We described the boy as deceased, washed away in a flash flood deep in the ravine. The truth, that he was alive, well, and protected by a Sasquatch, was something we both knew would end our careers or worse. The secret ate at me for months. Every time I flew over that remote stretch of forest, I'd strain my eyes, searching for a flash of unnatural color, a glimpse of the impossible woven shelter. I never saw it again. The Sasquatch and its adopted human son had vanished into the vastness of the mountains, swallowed up by the wilderness they clearly considered home. 2 years later, I retired from search and rescue. The constant pretense of normalcy, the need to deny the unthinkable reality of what I'd witnessed, was too much. I needed distance, a clean break from the deep woods and the secrets it held. But the story didn't end there. I got a message, encrypted and untraceable, from George Henry. It was a single audio file. I downloaded it, heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. It was the sound of those same guttural calls, the clicking, the long, mournful moan of a lost language. But this time, it was followed by a human voice, speaking English, with a strange, lilting cadence. The voice belonged to an adolescent boy. He watches, he learns, he will bring the gifts, the voice said, before dissolving back into the clicks and growls. George Henry had been monitoring the ravine, running secret, illegal surveillance using long-range audio equipment, and he'd finally captured definitive proof. The boy was not only communicating with the creature, he was interpreting its language, its intent. The implications were staggering. We weren't just dealing with an isolated cryptid. We were dealing with a species that had successfully integrated a human into its culture, a species that was now aware of the outside world, learning its rules and perhaps its vulnerabilities. This was beyond unexplainable. George Henry and I met in a dimly lit diner near the city. He was pale, jumpy, his hands shaking. He showed me thermal imagery captured from an old fire lookout tower near the ravine. The image clearly depicted two figures moving through the forest. One was massive, the Sasquatch, and the other was a human, easily identifiable as William Thomas, now a gangly, powerful teenager. They moved with a shared unnatural grace, their steps perfectly synchronized, their bodies adapting seamlessly to the rough terrain. The thermal signature of the creature was enormous, radiating heat in a way that defied normal mammalian physiology, suggesting a much higher core temperature. "He's been seen closer to the edge of the forest," George whispered, his eyes scanning the windows as if expecting to see a massive, hairy figure peering in. "The locals are starting to talk again, not about a monster, but about a boy, a wild boy, always accompanied by a shadow." He then showed me another image, a still shot from a motion-activated trail camera. It was William, standing alone at the edge of a game trail, leaving a collection of perfectly arranged pine cones and polished stones. Beside the offering was a small tin of unopened canned goods he must have retrieved from a nearby abandoned logging camp. This was not the random action of a frightened child. "What's a gift?" George stated, his voice a strained whisper, an offering, a sign of respect. They're establishing a territory line, a fragile peace with the humans nearby. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of us. The legendary monster was practicing diplomacy, while we, the humans, were reduced to surveillance and paranoia. George's gut feeling was that the boy was the key, the emissary, having lived in both worlds. He was the one who could interpret human intentions and communicate the creature's desire for isolation. This Sasquatch was a creature of high intelligence. That night, George Henry and I made a decision. We wouldn't share the full story, not yet. The potential for panic, for a full-scale military intervention that would certainly end in tragedy, was too great. We would continue monitoring, gathering more evidence, looking for an opportunity to understand the Sasquatch language more fully, or perhaps to find a way to communicate a clear, non-threatening message of our own. George Henry felt an unshakable responsibility to the boy, a human child now fully integrated into a non-human family. He felt he had no choice but to maintain this dangerous, clandestine surveillance. But the mountain had other plans. A week later, George Henry vanished. His wife, Eleanor Mary, reported him missing after he failed to return from what he claimed was a solo fishing trip. His surveillance equipment, his Jeep, and all his research notes were gone. I knew instantly where he was, or rather where he wasn't. The mountain had reclaimed another one who knew too much. My adrenaline spiked, quickly replaced by a cold dread. I knew I was next. I was the last living person who knew the truth, and the Sasquatch was known for remembering injustices. I flew back to George's last known location. It was a remote game trail that skirted a restricted national park area. I found his empty Jeep, windows intact, keys in the ignition, and his emergency beacon on the seat. The scene was eerily quiet, the kind of oppressive silence I had experienced in the ravine years before. But this time there were no tracks. The ground was rocky and hard, leaving no visible sign of struggle or entry. It was too clean, too perfect, making the imminent danger feel even more unsettling. This was beyond the casual work of a wild animal. As I surveyed the empty area, my radio crackled to life. It was a pre-recorded message, a failsafe George Henry had clearly set up, triggered by a hidden timer. His voice, strained but resolved, filled the cockpit. "If you're hearing this, Jake, they took me. They know too much. But I left something for you. You have to understand the unexplainable before they silence you too. Don't come looking, just listen." The message ended, followed by the familiar, haunting sounds of the Sasquatch language. Clicks, guttural moans, and then a clear human voice translating. The voice was William Thomas, now a man. He offers a choice. He offers silence or he offers the price. The voice paused, the strange cadence making the simple English words sound like a foreign oath. The price is knowing. The price is never sharing. The price is respect for the deep woods. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving me alone with the silence and the terrifying knowledge that I had just been given an ultimatum by a legendary creature, delivered by a man who had grown up among the giants. I was faced with a no-choice decision in the middle of a vast, unforgiving wilderness. I didn't need to discuss the implications. I was an experienced survivalist, and I knew when the odds were stacked against me. I chose the price. I destroyed all my personal notes, erased the recorded message from my hard drive, and removed all my flying logs detailing the area. Long story short, I walked away from the truth, accepting a lifetime of paranoia and anxiety in exchange for my life. I knew I could never go back to that part of the forest, never speak a word of what I'd learned, and never try to contact William Thomas again. The Sasquatch had made its intentions clear. I started a new life in a bustling East Coast city, far from the silence of the deep woods. I work a desk job now, something mundane, something that requires no adrenaline and involves no imminent danger. But every so often, when the wind blows just right between the skyscrapers, I hear it, a low rumbling echo, a distant guttural call that my mind translates instantly into a silent warning. The creature is still there, William Thomas is still there, and they remember. The Sasquatch raised a human, and that human learned to speak its language, its code of silence, and its price for living in this world. The burden of that knowledge is unbearable, yet it is the price of my survival. I often wonder about William, about his life among the giants, about the knowledge he possesses. Does he miss his old life, his human language, his family, or has he completely adopted the way of the Sasquatch, becoming a protector of their secrets, a guardian of the unexplainable? The questions spin endlessly in my mind, and I have no choice but to carry them, silent and alone, until the day I die. This isn't the kind of adventure that ends with a neat bow or a triumphant return. It's a lifetime sentence of absolute certainty in the face of universal skepticism. I know many of you will read this and dismiss it as the overactive imagination of a retired pilot, or perhaps just another urban legend. That's fine. It's preferable, actually. Because if you were to believe me, you would have to confront the fact that we are not alone on this planet. You would have to accept that a creature we deem mythological is not only real, but possesses an intelligence and social structure complex enough to adopt a human child, teach him its language, and use him to negotiate a fragile peace with an encroaching world. This is the terrifying truth I carry, the price of my life. I often think about George Henry and his final coded message. He left me a breadcrumb trail of knowledge, a key to understanding the Sasquatch code of ethics, their profound and unsettling sense of justice. He detailed the 5 core principles they had imparted to William Thomas during his time with them. The principles were simple, yet powerful, forming the foundation of their culture and their interactions with the dangerous world of humans. George Henry had risked everything, including his life, to document and understand these tenets, believing that one day they might serve as a means of genuine communication. The first principle was the harmony of silence, teaching the paramount value of non-intervention and the profound isolation needed for their species' survival. The second was the currency of respect, emphasizing that interactions with any life form, human or animal, must be based on genuine, uncoerced respect, not fear or coercion. The third was the measure of mercy, instructing that violence should only be used as a last resort, after all attempts at deterrence or negotiation have failed. The fourth was the reciprocity of knowledge, a complex tenet suggesting that for every piece of their world revealed, a piece of the human world must be understood and, sometimes, given up. And the fifth, the one that cost George Henry his freedom, was the absoluteness of the boundary. George Henry's final discovery before his capture was a coded map near the city limits, detailing the Sasquatch's established territorial boundaries. These lines weren't marked by fences or signs, but by specific, arranged natural formations. A massive scarred tree and unnaturally polished stone. A stream that flowed in a precise geometric pattern. The creatures were using their immense strength and long lifespans to maintain these borders, a clear warning to those who ventured too deep. The price they had demanded. My silence was a direct consequence of this fifth principle being violated. Their home, their way of life, was non-negotiable. I know what many of you are thinking. Why didn't I just go to the authorities? Why didn't I tell the world William Thomas was alive? Long story short, I knew that any attempt to rescue William would result in a firefight that the Sasquatch family would win. They had the home field advantage, the raw strength, and a clear, unshakable purpose. I've seen the damage a single Sasquatch can inflict. I did not want to imagine the ensuing massive shaking of the forest, the ensuing carnage that would follow a military response. I made a calculation based on pure survival and a deep-seated respect for a force I knew I could not defeat. It's an unsettling kind of survival, though. Every day is a silent test, a constant reminder of the imminent danger of speaking the truth. I live with the paranoia that one day, my city apartment will feel the unmistakable pressure of a massive footfall outside the door, the low guttural warning that I have failed the test. I keep a copy of George Henry's 5 principles taped inside my bathroom mirror, a daily reminder of the alien code I live by. I adhere to the code out of fear, yes, but also out of a grudging respect. They spared me. I must honor their mercy. I often wonder if William Thomas himself negotiated the truce. Did he stand between his human world and his adopted family, pleading for my life and George Henry's temporary freedom? The thought of a human boy raised by giants, translating the language of fear into the language of diplomacy, is both beautiful and terrifying. It suggests a level of cross-cultural communication that we, with all our technology, could not hope to achieve. The Sasquatch chose a child, a mind unmarred by human prejudice, to be their voice. It was a stroke of genius, a simple, elegant solution to the problem of human encroachment in the deep woods. I think about his parents, William's human parents, who still hold annual memorials for their lost boy. They will never know the truth, that their child is alive, that he found a home among the giants, and that he speaks a language older than our civilization. That is part of the price. The human grief for the lost, the unexplainable absence, is the necessary collateral for the Sasquatch's right to exist in silence. I wish I could tell them, offer them some closure, but I have no choice. The truth would put them and everyone else in the path of a force that only desires isolation and respect. I have accepted that I will live the rest of my life in this unnatural state of knowing. I am the self-appointed, non-consensual custodian of the Sasquatch secret, forever bound to the deep woods by an ultimatum delivered in a terrifying, yet logical, language. The next time you hear a strange sound in the mountains, a guttural moan that sends a shiver down your spine, remember William Thomas. Remember that the silence you hear might not be emptiness, but a profoundly intelligent presence, listening, learning, and waiting for you to respect the absolute boundary of its domain. The knowledge is my burden, and my price. You know how people always think of Florida as sunshine, beaches, and maybe some weird theme parks? Well, let me tell you, there are parts of that state that are entirely different. Primordial places that don't care about your vacation plans or your Instagram followers. Our story is about Amelia King, a wildlife blogger who made a career out of venturing into those dark, wet secrets. She disappeared a year ago in the heart of the Everglades National Park, and everyone, myself included, figured that was it. The swamp had claimed her, quiet and complete. The closest people got to a theory was maybe a python or a territorial alligator. No one considered what they eventually found. No one was ready for the unsettling truth that came with that empty boat. The Everglades is a place where you learn a whole new definition of quiet. It's not the silence of a forest, but a dense, humid quiet broken only by the slithering buzzing and snapping of things that have lived there since before history began. Amelia was drawn to that ancient, dangerous solitude. Her blog, Swamp Lore, had a substantial following, built on her willingness to push further than anyone else, seeking out ghost orchids, rare birds, and honestly, a little bit of danger. It wasn't just recklessness. She was experienced, meticulous about her gear, and had enough survival certifications to staff a small rescue team. She went in prepared, which is why her disappearance, a year ago this past October, hit so hard. Her last post was just a grainy photo of a cypress dome, captioned, "It's quieter here than I've ever known. Too quiet." Amelia was scheduled to check in from a specific GPS coordinate on October 23rd. When the deadline passed with no word, and then another 24 hours, her concerned family called the authorities. The search was massive. Coast Guard helicopters, airboats filled with park rangers, and even civilian swamp trackers combed the designated search zone, an area known for its isolated mangrove tunnels and thick sawgrass prairies. They found nothing. No sign of a struggle, no discarded equipment, nothing to suggest she had even been there. It was like she evaporated into the humid air, leaving behind only the chilling memory of that final quiet post. Then, 3 weeks ago, a fishing trawler off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico dragged something unexpected onto its deck, a small, aluminum skiff with a low-powered engine. It was Amelia's boat. It was undeniably hers. The registration number was correct, the distinctive blue paint was faded, and the small solar panel she used to charge her equipment was still bolted onto the stern. The park rangers who recovered it immediately noticed something peculiar. The boat was intact, undamaged, but it was listing heavily. The fishing crew assumed it had simply taken on water after sitting for so long. But when the skiff was brought ashore, the rangers quickly realized it was holding a substantial amount of weight that was making it sit low in the water. This weight wasn't distributed evenly, causing the unsettling tilt. It was almost all clustered near the front of the skiff, beneath the small bow compartment, where Amelia kept her extra fuel and bulky supplies. The rangers cut the metal wire securing the access hatch. When they lifted the small cover, the scent that hit them was overwhelming. Not the usual swamp smell of decay and brine, but something else entirely. A mix of musk, something oddly metallic, and an odor that one of the veteran rangers described as similar to a meat processing plant, only somehow more organic. Inside the compartment, carefully arranged, were two items that should not have been there. The first object was Amelia's high-end DSLR camera. It was encased in a thick, waterproof housing, perfectly preserved, its memory card intact. The other object defied easy description. It was a structure woven meticulously from local sawgrass, willow branches, and small, dark mangrove roots. It was about the size of a human torso and shaped like a complicated asymmetrical basket, but covered with thick, dark hair. The hair, later DNA tested, was primate in origin, but not from any primate known to North America. The weaving was impossibly intricate, precise, almost mathematically ordered. It wasn't a random nest. It was a carefully constructed artifact displaying a level of intelligence that terrified the park staff. This suggested an advanced problem-solving ability that you wouldn't expect from a simple animal. They immediately realized the sheer physical strength it would take to weave these thick materials together, as well as the deliberate skill required. The artifact felt heavy, dense, its contents suspected to be the source of the unsettling weight and that strange organic odor that permeated the boat. Everyone in that humid storage facility had the same thought, clearly communicating the gravity of the situation. Amelia's disappearance wasn't just a simple accident. The camera contained over 400 images, the last 35 of which were not of the Everglades ecosystem. The initial photos were typical of Amelia's work: breathtaking shots of water birds, dense cypress swamps, and misty morning views of the mangrove forests. Everything was exactly as expected until October 20th, 3 days before she was due to check in. The new photos showed evidence that mirrored the strange discoveries of other wilderness encounters. They started with tracks in the mud, clearly bipedal and impossibly huge, measuring an estimated 22 inches long. The photos then shifted to documenting a path of deliberately broken branches and strangely arranged river stones, which seemed to function as trail markers. Something was guiding her further in, or maybe something was warning her out. The tone of her final 10 pictures was one of growing, absolute terror. They weren't sharp, professional nature shots anymore. They were quick, hurried snapshots taken in low light, obviously captured by someone in distress. One picture, taken at night, showed a dark, massive silhouette standing at the edge of a small clearing. The creature stood upright, its shoulders impossibly broad, its height estimated at over 9 feet, barely visible in the weak flash. You can only imagine the fear that must have gripped her in that moment. The most unsettling photograph, taken from inside a small, makeshift shelter, showed what appeared to be two large, intelligent eyes reflecting the light of her camera's flash, staring directly through a gap in the woven sawgrass of her temporary shelter. These weren't the blank, instinctive eyes of an animal. They held an unmistakable awareness that made the park rangers instantly contact federal agencies. The last image on the camera was completely black, marred by a massive, wet smear that covered the lens, almost as if something had pushed its incredibly large hand directly onto the housing. This confirmed the unsettling proximity of the creature, a final terrifying goodbye from the wilderness. When the park superintendent Henry Archer Black received the full report, he immediately classified the situation as an ecological matter beyond normal park jurisdiction. He called in specialists from a federal department that deals with unclassified biological phenomena. The briefing he gave to the incoming team was terse. "We have a missing civilian. Her boat was found, and the contents point to something highly intelligent and non-human operating within the park's deepest core. Your objective is not a rescue, it's confirmation and containment." The federal team, comprised of half a dozen people in military-grade survival gear, entered the park 4 days after the boat's discovery. Their objective: trace Amelia's GPS path using the embedded data from her camera to find the location of those final terrifying pictures. As they moved into the deeper sections of the park, where the water turned black and the mangrove roots formed impenetrable living walls, the ecosystem went silent. This wasn't just the quiet they were used to. It was a profound, suffocating absence of all life, a condition only ever reported in areas that are home to a dominant, unchallenged apex predator. Even the alligators seemed to vanish from the deeper channels they navigated. The journey was difficult, forcing the team to cut their way through dense vegetation where their airboat couldn't pass, wading through water that concealed potential threats beneath the dark, still surface. After 3 days of punishing progress, they arrived at the cypress dome visible in Amelia's last GPS-tagged picture. The sight was disturbing. Her original camp was clearly visible, but it had been meticulously disassembled. Not destroyed, but carefully taken apart, her equipment sorted into precise piles. Her tent canvas was folded neatly, and even the fire pit stones were placed in a perfect circle that was strangely ordered. However, three enormous, three-fingered handprints were visible in the mud near the camp perimeter, each one nearly twice the size of a human hand and pressed with staggering depth. The prints led away from the campsite, directly into a thick, tangled mass of mangrove roots and willow. It was a path no normal animal, or even a determined human, could have navigated without tremendous effort. The team followed the trail, cutting away the dense, fibrous material, and noticed that the larger mangrove roots along the path seemed to be bent and woven together, creating a low, dark tunnel. They were forced to crawl, their weapons held at low ready, moving slowly through the dense, dark structure. The tunnel smelled strongly of that unknown musk, mixed now with the scent of wet earth and something ancient that spoke of deep, concealed shelter. They followed this strange, organic tunnel for almost 2 hours, the structure never varying in its diameter or shape. Finally, the tunnel opened into a large, hidden cavern, formed by a tangle of exposed mangrove roots and a massive limestone sinkhole filled with black, stagnant water. The area was a natural anomaly, completely concealed from above, a vast, dark cathedral of roots, rock, and humid airs. In the center of the cavern, constructed on a dry shelf of rock, was a complex, elaborate structure, woven from the same materials as the artifact found in Amelia's boat. This was clearly a dwelling large enough to accommodate a family of beings that dwarfed a human. Scattered around the perimeter were other objects, meticulously crafted, suggesting tool use. There were primitive axes made from sharpened rock and wood, and long, heavy sticks that appeared to be modified as digging tools. The discovery confirmed the incredible intelligence and manual dexterity of the creatures. This was clearly a permanent, highly functional home. Then, one of the searchers saw something that made him freeze, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped his rifle. Resting on a high, exposed root that seemed to serve as a shelf was Amelia's personalized hiking boot, its distinctive red laces bright against the dark wood. It was carefully placed next to a much larger, roughly formed foot covering, woven from the same dark, thick hair found in the skiff. The arrangement was chilling, a trophy, a deliberate marker, or maybe something more profound that hinted at a deeper connection between the human and the unknown inhabitants of the swamp. Before the team could process the implication of the boot's placement, a sharp rhythmic sound echoed through the cavern. Wood knocking. A series of deliberate, forceful impacts against a hard surface, seeming to come from multiple locations outside the cavern. The team immediately understood. They were surrounded, and their presence hadn't been exposed. The response was coordinated and terrifying. The rhythmic knocking evolved into a language of percussion, fast and complex, seeming to move around the cavern's perimeter, testing for weak points. The search leader immediately recognized the tactical nature of the sounds, realizing they were facing something far more advanced than a simple territorial dispute with an aggressive animal. As the knocking continued, the search team began to hear vocalizations, deep guttural calls that resonated through the rock and water. They sounded conversational, almost linguistic, but not human. The calls were clearly directed at them, communicating the profound, escalating displeasure of the cavern's inhabitants. It was a sound that spoke of fury and betrayal, the roar of a creature whose sanctuary had been invaded by creatures it might once have viewed with curiosity. The decision was made to retreat, but the tactical difficulty was overwhelming. They were deep within the creature's lair, confined to a small, enclosed space, surrounded by unknown numbers of enormous, intelligent beings that communicated silently in the dark. The retreat through the tunnel was pure terror. They moved as quickly as possible, hampered by the small space and the relentless pressure from outside. The creatures didn't charge directly. They simply matched the team's speed and direction, maintaining a constant, claustrophobic distance. Every time the team paused, a low, rumbling call would sound directly outside the tunnel, as if to remind them that they were being watched. The retreat took nearly an hour, and when they finally emerged from the tunnel entrance back into the light of the cypress dome, they saw them. 4 massive figures standing at the edge of the clearing, all over 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to shift with the movements of their colossal bodies. The leader, the largest of the 4, stepped forward. It made a series of clicks and grunts, a sophisticated vocalization that felt like a warning. an ultimate ultimatum to leave and never return. The team didn't need to hear it twice. They ran for their airboat, crashing through the sawgrass, hearing the monstrous footsteps of the creatures pounding through the swamp behind them. They made it to the boat and sped away, leaving the Cypress Dome to the creatures who clearly ruled that territory. The mission was an objective failure in terms of human rescue, but an undeniable success in terms of biological confirmation. They had seen something that shouldn't exist, and they had confirmed that the legend of the swamp people was terrifyingly real. The subsequent investigation has led to the permanent classification of the deeper Everglades as a no-fly, no-entry zone. The official explanation is an unprecedented outbreak of a rare, highly contagious, and dangerous fungal infection, but the truth is kept sealed under layers of federal secrecy. Amelia King is still listed as missing, presumed lost to the harsh elements of the swamp. Her family has been compensated with a large financial settlement in exchange for their silence about the contents of the boat. They are forced to live with the knowledge that their daughter was not simply lost, but taken, held, or absorbed by something that lives in the deep, quiet secrets of the Florida swamp. The artifact and the camera remain in a classified federal research facility in Atlanta, studied by a small team of cryptobiologists who are attempting to translate the vocalizations recorded on the audio files. But the real mystery isn't where Amelia is, it's what she became. Did she die and her body was simply disposed of by the creatures? Was she taken captive, kept in that organic dwelling as an object of curiosity? Or, and this is the most unsettling theory of all, did Amelia choose to stay? Her journal, recovered from the skiff, contained a final, hastily scrawled note, written the morning she disappeared. "The quiet is breaking. I heard them. They sound like family. I'm leaving the boat. I have to know. Did she make contact with them, and in doing so find a new, terrible acceptance in the heart of the deepest wilderness? We may never know. All we have is the empty boat, the terrifying images, and the unsettling realization that in the great, primordial silence of the Everglades, something intelligent is still watching." Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed my narration. If you'd like to support us, do subscribe and hit that like button. See you tomorrow, my friends.